Welcome to the Jubilee Museum series. I'm your host, Wanda Dengel. In today's program, we're going to look at the contributions that women religious made to the growth of the Catholic Church. Joining me remotely from Columbus, Ohio, are the founder of the Jubilee Museum, Father Kevin Lutz, and Shawn Kenney, the executive director.
Hi, Wanda. How are you?
Good morning. How are you guys?
Doing fine.
Good, great. Well, let's begin with the very basics. Sometimes we hear people referring to women religious as nuns and sisters. Is there a difference?
Absolutely is a difference. So first of all, Wanda, we're actually seated today in our convent room here at the museum. So when visitors come here, especially non-Catholics, they get exposed to the sisters and the nuns and what their lives were like and what they put in over the years. They're involved in so much, and even as non-Catholics, you watch movies and things, you get an idea of what a sister or a nun is. But there actually is a difference between a nun and a sister. We normally relate the nuns to sisters who are cloistered, who spend a lot more time praying, and that we're not necessarily out in the public. And then a sister is more of the sisters we see, Mother Teresa, people out working with the poor, out in the hospitals, and actively involved with the people. So there is a difference there. And Father might want to even embellish on that even more.
The words have often been used interchangeably, but in a more precise way. Nuns are totally dedicated to their contemplative life and have very little contact with the outside world. Sisters, the very title sister is to show that she is meant to be a sister to all who she talks to. It's a familial term, so you're supposed to feel a special closeness to her just by the very title she carries.
Well, let's go through the different stages that a woman who wants to become a nun has to go through. For instance, in the very beginning, there's a trial period, is there not?
There is. That period, which lasts from anywhere from about 6 months to a year, you're called a postulant. That comes from a Latin word meaning to ask. You're basically asking to live with the sisters to see if that life and yours can work out well. I have here a small nun doll from the Stella Niagara Franciscans, and it shows what a postulant looks like. It's just a simple black dress. The hair shows on the front, and it was just a modest dress, and it didn't even go all the way to the feet. It was kind of like just a black jumper or a uniform. And as a postulant, they spent a year learning what the role was all about. And at the end of that year, if they wanted to, they could then enter and become members of the community and receive the habit. I'm sorry. When they became novices, I had to put this up, it's going to block the screen here a little bit. But this shows ceremony was taken August 17th, 1965 at Stella Niagara, New York. And actually, you can see there are about 24 girls lined up, dressed as brides, and they entered the chapel. In fact, the third one from the viewer's left was just here in Columbus and saw her picture as a bride for the first time. She'd never seen the photograph.
Oh, that's pretty cool. That's pretty cool.
That shows the ceremony. Now, during the ceremony, they took off the bridal veil and they were given their habits folded up. They were blessed by the bishop, and they wore a white veil, which kind of indicated they were in training. And the novices looked like this. So they had a white veil, and that way the other sisters in the community knew that they were in training. And they had a 2-year period where they wore this kind of a veil. And in that time, they were observing the strictest life, many hours a day in prayer and in work and in study. At that time, they didn't have any duties for teaching. And after they concluded that 2-year period called the novitiate, then they made first vows and they received a black veil and they looked more like this. Now, many orders had the similar custom with the white veil for novices and a black veil once you made your vows. And once you made your vows, you were fully incorporated into the order. And after a period of vows for several years, you made what were called perpetual vows. And then you spent the rest of your life in assignments as a teacher, as a nurse. This particular order of nuns ran schools, hospitals, colleges, orphanages. They ran many different kinds of institutions and were legendary in their sacrificial lives and the work they did.
What were in general, I know that different orders will perhaps add, an additional vow, but in general, what were the vows that the nuns took? Universally, there are like 3, are there not?
Poverty, which meant you didn't own anything. In fact, technically speaking, the sisters did not even own their own habits. They had their names in them, but many times the music book that they might have, if they were organists, it would say for the use of Sister Mary Ann, but it wasn't her book. So they didn't own their things, they just used them, and it was considered community property. Second vow was chastity, in which they consecrated all their love to Jesus Christ and also to serving those whom they were called to serve, who were the little ones of Christ, children or the sick in the hospitals or orphans. So their love was to be directed towards their care. But primarily, their first love was to be towards Jesus Christ. And the third vow was obedience. And these 3 vows represent things about the life of Christ, because Christ didn't own things. He said the Son of Man has no place to lay his head. Even his seamless robe was taken from him at Calvary. And also, he attached himself to no earthly objects. He was nailed to the cross, but even the cross belonged to the Roman Empire. So Christ owned nothing, and that's what a nun tries to imitate. And then his love was completely consecrated to the Father and to our salvation. And then finally, the vow of obedience. And that meant that you took the assignment that was given to you, such as going to a particular school, and then maybe leaving that school after a couple of years to take another assignment elsewhere, or to become a principal or a superior. Now, a few orders took a 4th vow. And I have to tell you, the cleverest vow ever taken was by the Sisters of the Good Shepherd. They took a 4th vow to imitate secretly the humility of Christ. They worked mostly with highly at-risk children. Many of the girls that were brought to them were court-ordered because they had been arrested for prostitution and other things. And many times the girls were given the choice, jail or the Good Shepherd convent. The smart ones chose the convent. They didn't become nuns. That wasn't the purpose. But they were given a clean place. They were taught how to read. Many of them couldn't even read. Many of them learned how to sew, to knit, to cook, and many other things that they could use when they finally graduated and could go and find some respectable employment. This is especially true 100 years ago, when the domestic arts were very highly prized. But the sisters took a vow to imitate the humility of Christ. So whenever they had to do a task that involved the children, like cleaning a bathroom, the nun would always do the toilet. And if a girl even said, "Oh, sister, let me do that," she would just say, "No, I'm fine with this. You do the sinks." Because they always had to do what would be considered the humblest task. If they worked in the garden, the sister would pull the weeds, and the children would water the flowers or pick the roses or whatever they did. And when they cooked, the sister did the pots and pans while the children mixed the ingredients, probably under her guidance, but they wanted the children to have a hands-on experience. Many times when a cook does their work, they'll say, "Watch what I do." The sister simply told the children how to mix the spices and the foods and cook them, but they did the more menial tasks, such as washing and drying the dishes. That didn't go unnoticed among many of these exploited girls, that these women were very self-sacrificing. So that 4th vow to imitate the humility of Christ inspired some of them to even want to become Catholics, and it inspired some of those to even become nuns. Now, normally a life as a prostitute would disqualify you from the convent, but on the other hand, their foundress believed that if a girl had had a true conversion of heart, she should be allowed to try out the convent life and do penance for her sins.
I know that there was an orphanage in Columbus at one time. Were those nuns the Rochester, Minnesota Franciscans, or what order nuns ran the orphanage?
There were two orphanages. One was St. Vincent's, and this little nun doll that I just showed you before, the Stella Niagara Franciscans, this is the order that actually ran that. And there are still people who remember the care of the nuns there. And when we have reunions for St. Vincent's, we see them. They would recognize that habit. The other habit was the Good Shepherd sisters, and their old convent was right across the street from the current Jubilee Museum.
Well, you know, I know that nuns have played an important role in the Diocese of Columbus, as well as in the entire Catholic Church. There are nuns that are known for their hospital work, and those are the Holy Cross nuns. Could you tell us a little bit about those nuns?
Yeah, so the Sisters of the Holy Cross, we actually have a nun doll, and then you have the image, and it's actually behind us as well, Sisters of the Holy Cross. So those of you who are watching that are familiar with Columbus or the majority of Ohio know the Mount Carmel health system that is here in town. They were actually founded by the Sisters of the Holy Cross. They ran the hospital. If you've been here for tours of the museum, we do point out these beautiful sisters. And it's very unique habits. We actually had a gentleman through here a few weeks ago for a tour. He was about 93 years old. And he saw that habit, and he goes, because that habit still haunts me. And I said, well, why does it haunt you? He said, the hospital. And sisters that were doing my surgery were wearing their habits with this before they gassed me and put me under for the surgery. So he's remembered the habits, which was really neat. But as you know, Mount Carmel is transitioning here in Columbus, building a new hospital. But one sister from the Holy Cross is still involved on their board of trustees, Sister Barbara Hall. We're good friends with her. But Sisters of the Holy Cross, and I'm sure Father can tell you a little bit more about it as well.
They had an unusual custom. The collar you saw that the nun doll was wearing and is on the mannequin as well was made of celluloid. And so it's a very stiff material, kind of like a plastic. And when a sister died, they kept a death register, and the lines in the death register were numbered. So every time a sister died, they would put her name on the line. Then they took these little discs. I'm going to have to hold this pretty close for you to see it. It has a number on it. And I think you can see it's 989. That would mean on the 989th line of the death register is her name. Now they have this obituary box outside their chapel. And the custom was...
I think we have an image. I think we have an image of it.
Yes.
Yep, there it is.
When you pull out the number from one side, you say a prayer for her soul, and you drop it into the other side, and then the top of it slides back and forth. And that way they perpetually remember their faithfully departed sisters. A beautiful custom.
That is a wonderful custom, because all of us, every one of us needs prayers. I found out something very interesting about the Holy Cross sisters. They were involved in the Civil War. Not in the fighting, but they were asked by the governor of Indiana to work at the Union Hospital, and the Mother Superior and 5 of her nuns met with General Ulysses S. Grant in Cairo, Illinois, and then after that meeting, number of nuns were dispatched to different regions like Illinois, Kentucky, Kentucky, Missouri, and Tennessee, and they worked with those who were wounded and who were ill during the Civil War. And not only that, they also served on the ship, the naval ship called Red Rover. And because of their service during the Civil War, a commander, I think his name was Davis, last name was Davis, he presented, after the Civil War, presented 2 cannons from the Civil War to the congregation. And as a token of appreciation for what they had done to help the soldiers during that war. And unfortunately, during the Second World War, when iron was badly needed, those cannons were melted into iron scrap. But those nuns, the Holy Cross nuns, are the first Navy nurses, which I thought was interesting to learn, that this congregation of women who were very humble, as all the congregations are, but did this without any sort of recompense. They did this humbly, and that they were recognized by the government for all the good that they had done. So
a lot of times, even here at the museum, we have a military collection. But some of the most beautiful images that we have of the different wars with the sisters are they're actually out on the battlefield. They are actually tending to the dying and the sick. And if it was me after a battle and I was laying there dying, I'd love to have a sister next to me. One of the
Absolutely.
But we have beautiful images of the Daughters of Charity, the habit that you see here in the image to our right. Looks like Sally Field's habit from the Flying Nun. But we actually have them out on the battlefield. People are laying there and literally retrieving their bodies or seeing if they're still living. So probably too.
Well, there's a famous painting about the Civil War that shows one of those sisters with the starched habit that you see at the edge of the screen, and she was shot accidentally, I'm sure, by a soldier who was aiming at somebody else, but she died in the arms of a Union soldier, and one of the men who saw that described it, and it later became a very famous painting. But there's a monument to the nuns at Gettysburg, and it shows their very different habits, but they're all lined up there because they were the legendary nurses. Now, the nursing field was very primitive at that time, and most of these nuns were not trained in it. They were trained to be teachers and musicians, but their basic care was comfort, cleaning wounds, and assisting doctors in what, primitive surgery they were able to do on battlefields to close wounds and even amputate legs. There's a legendary story told about a sister of the Holy Cross who helped nurse a soldier that they had given up. They weren't even going to attend to him. They just saw that he was dying. She insisted on working with him and brought him through the difficulty. And when he recovered, he never knew who this nun was. Many years later, he became a doctor, and he heard her voice. He recognized her voice at Mount Carmel. Of all places, they ended up in the same building. And he said, what is your name? And he found out it was the same nun that took care of him on the battlefield. And she lived into her late 90s. So they were heroic. And also the nuns, many of the soldiers didn't know how to write, and some of them were dying, but they wanted their mothers and fathers to hear their last words. And the nun would take dictation and then write the letter to the parents and say something at the end like, your son died peacefully, and he was holding his prayer book or his Bible. And then she'd say, if you would like more information about your son, I was the sister who took care of him. My name is Sister Benedicta. I can be reached at St. Mary Convent in Kansas City. And those letters are actually highly valued now. The museum is trying to find a couple so that we can preserve them, at least one of them. One of these letters from a soldier dictated to a nun and sent to a family. It's a real treasure for those who collect Civil War memorabilia.
And it's wonderful to hear these stories because many of us never knew the involvement of the nuns in the Civil War, their heroic efforts and their humility and just the love of people that they had. Now, I understand that you have something else in your collection that has a connection with Portsmouth, Ohio, and that is the connection of the sisters of the Poor Clares of Perpetual Adoration. And there you see her making hosts. Can we show the machine that, or the mold that was used to make the hosts? Now, Father Lutz, these were not the tiny hosts, were they?
Yeah.
Or these were the hosts that you use at consecration?
Yeah. Well, they made both on the same machine. They had different grills that you could put on there that would bake each one. But we have the machine that's seen there in the photograph. We have that here in the museum. You can see it has a heavy counterweight on it. And a lot of times, sometimes they were like, they would call them Hail Marys or Glory Bees because they would hold the press down to cook it for the length of a short prayer, like a Glory Be, Gloria Patri, and then lift it and the host would be ready. Now, before those machines were made, that was an electric device. Shawn's about to show you something here on the screen. These were used back in the days when hosts were made over an open fire. And so it's a couple of tongs, and you can see that there's an imprint of there, and they would pour a little batter, and I'm sure many young nuns made mistakes the first few ties, but they would try to learn how to time it well and then make the host for the altar. We have about 4 of these sets of tongs here in the museum. They were often used in isolated parishes where you couldn't get hosts from a convent or anything like that. You were just kind of on your own. So each convent would have a little host-making device, and that was the sideline works that the nuns did, along with sewing vestments and making altar linens.
And then we have, we looked at some of the habits of the nuns, and I noticed one of the habits behind you, Shawn, is blue. We're familiar with the brown and the black habits. Can you tell us a little bit about that particular order?
So the blue set behind me here, these are the Dominican Sisters of the Immaculate Conception Province. And as you can see, they have a bright blue habit here. Actually, this is their winter habit. During the summer, they actually wear a white habit. It's the same exact habit, but all in white. And of course, different habits, they all look different, but different habits also reflected the climate. You weren't going to be a sister in Africa and be wearing all black. You were wearing white. So these sisters kind of have their summer and winter habit as well, kind of a neat thing. But these sisters are here in Columbus now. This order of sisters are involved with nursing, they're involved with the schools. And so they've actually moved to Columbus a few years ago. One of the sisters is working at our soup kitchen here. And the other sisters actually just opened a preschool, a Catholic preschool here in Columbus. So we're lucky to have these sisters. Another order that just moved here to Columbus, we do not have their full habit yet. They do have one for us. These are the Brigittine sisters from Rome. And to put it in perspective for you, Mother Superior was here from Rome, because when we come out of our convent, and we have about an 8-minute walk and we're at the Vatican. So they are very close to the Pope, and they have a very interesting cap. And yes, they wear this cap all the time. So it's very neat to see these habited sisters here. It's amazing how the number of postulants are growing with orders that are wearing habits. This is a form of identity. Back in the old days, if you were walking down the streets of Columbus, you could tell by the habit, oh, those are the Dominican sisters, or what order and what they were responsible for just by their habits. So it's a beautiful thing. And again, all the habits that we have here in this convent room are real habits. These are not replicas, which we're proud of. And a lot of our visitors that we get from overseas are sisters. They hear about our museum here in Columbus and they come see us. And one of the sisters was here recently. And I said, "Sister, we want your habit, for our collection." And she goes, "Right now?" So no, you can get us when you get time. You're behind us.
Well, one more thing I would like you to show our audience that they can find there at the museum, and then we have to close, is the clicker. Can you explain to us how this clicker was used?
You see it in both pictures. It's just a little old cow. Oh, you didn't have sister with the clicker. Actually, it's a little tiny thing, and all it does is make this sound. And sister would click that, and that meant be quiet. Class is about to start. Sister would also take this when she went to church, and when we all lined up in the aisle, I remember the sister would take this and click it, and we would all genuflect at once and then go into our pews. So the way it's described, sometimes you think it was the jaws of life, but it's a very simple little, and it makes a little tiny clicking sound. And it was never thrown. Don't ever get the idea of that. This was just a little wooden stick with a clicker on it.
It was just a tool that was used. Well, I know that you have many, many more things there at the museum that people can come in to view, and not only in the room that is designated for religious women, but so many other rooms as well. So I encourage everyone to stop at 67 Grubb Street in Columbus, Ohio. I'm sorry, I can't hear you, John.
57 South Grubb Street. And check out our website, jubileemuseum.org, and our Facebook page for our upcoming events. And our Marian display is out now for the month of May. So stop by and see us.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us. Father Lutz, thank you. Shawn, thank you. We'll see you again next month.
Thanks, Wanda.